Should now be.
Yes.
Yeah, now it's recording. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining me. Now, obviously, you were supposed to be coming to the UK. That has been prevented by your government. Can you kind of talk us through exactly how that happens?
Well, it is a practice that the Cuban government has been implementing, has been making in the last months, that they don't permit to Cuban oppositors, Cuban activists, or social civil workers, they don't permit them to abandon the country for a while, to give a speech, to work with other organizations in foreign countries. But in the last months, it has been usually, it has happened years before, but in the last month, it has happened more often. And maybe we have 100 or 200 of activists that can travel at this moment right now. It is with the government of Miguel Diaz-Canel that they are violating heavily, they are violating with strongly what the law says. It's something that we suffer usually. We don't suffer only the lack of rights, but we also suffer the violation of the rights that we have in our constitution and in our legislation. In my case, for example, now I can abandon the country because I am in a list of migratory institutions. But before, they have other ways to impeach your possibility to abandon the country, to avoid to abandon the country. That is to stop you in the travel to the airport, to put you in a prison for 10 hours, 20 hours, and to do not permit your travel to another country. The flight goes away, and then you are released. That has happened to me also. That has happened to me also, and that has happened to many oppositors and civil society activists in Cuba.
I mean, were you surprised that they blocked you from coming to the UK?
Were you surprised? Sorry.
Were you surprised that the government stopped you from coming to the UK?
No. I have been not surprised because since July, when I was going to travel to Panama, I was informed in the airport because the government never say that you have that prohibition. You know about that prohibition in the airport, and then in July I knew that I had that prohibition to abandon the country, and I have been prohibited all these months, and there are not any I don't see any sign by the government that it is going to be that I am going to give freedom of that disposition. Even I have been promoting a legal accusation to some authorities of migratory institutions, but of course it is just symbolically, because the institutions and the official of the army in Cuba, we, the oppositors and common people on the street, they can win in that kind of process.
I mean, so could you explain how you became involved in pro-democracy activism in Cuba?
Oh, yes. Well, in Cuba, we say we are oppositors, but it's not the same to be an oppositor in Cuba that to be an oppositor in United Kingdom, for example. Yes. So there are many people, I would say, without any doubt, that the biggest number of the population in Cuba think that it must change, but they don't define themselves as oppositors, because to be an oppositor is immediately to be attacked in the most lovely things you have, your family, your children, your work. So to be an oppositor is a hard decision that you must take someday. Then, of course, I don't want to abandon my country, and I don't think things in Cuba are good. I think it is a question of morality to say about what is happening in Cuba, and to say that the government of Castro is a criminal government. Then there is one day when you say, I can't continue like this. And then you decide to express your conformity with the situation. I did that change, right? From a domestic oppositor to a public oppositor. I made that change in 2010 when there was a wide movement because there was a Cuban oppositor that died in prison because he made a strike of hunger and he died. His name is Orlando Zapata Tamayo. And then finally, I began to make my opposition to the Cuban government. My opposition, I have made political opposition, but also I am a journalist and a civil rights defender. I was saying some days ago in another interview that unfortunately, it's not good that unfortunately, when you define yourself as an oppositor, a lot of times you identify yourself with a civil rights defender, because to be an oppositor is always to be in relation of friendship with people that are being attacked, that are being abusing, or that suffer a lot of different kind of attacks by the Cuban government and paramilitary groups associated to officials of the army.
Do you think the oppression and the repression is getting better or worse? Is it as bad as it's always been, or are there kind of some hopeful signs?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Sorry.
No, of course. Do you think the persecution, the repression is as bad as it's always been, or is it getting worse or better, or?
It's getting worse. It's getting worse. It's difficult to say it is getting worse because you have a big list of attacks, of heavy attacks and different kind of aggressions to the society in all these years, not just when I became an oppositor, but before. Always the Castroism has been a system that make a lot of aggressions to the oppositors, and very bad aggressions, because it's not only physical attacks, but also attacks to your morality, to your friend, to your family, to your work. It's really heavy. It's really hard to be an oppositor in Cuba. But in the last years, 2-3 years, the wave of the attacks, of the aggressions, has been taking places in more kind of civil society activists. For example, the journalists, they enjoyed it of some kind of relaxed situation. Some of them enjoyed of some kind of freedom in Cuban terms, of course, no in terms of country with freedom of press, but some kind of freedom. But now, in this moment, we have that every journalist, it doesn't matter the position to the government, every independent journalist are suffering different kind of attacks. There are also some activists that have been hired from the universities. It has happened a lot. It has happened a lot in the past, but now we have a hard movement in favor of this professional that has been hired. Hired is the word, hired from the work. Hired. When you say don't continue here, they have been hired from the work in the recent months. It has increased visibly, and of course, last weekend we had an important strike in the oriental part of the country by an organization that is called UNPACU, and they were imprisoned before the strike, more than 75 persons, and now in this moment we still have a lot of them that still are in prison. There is another important organization, as you know, there is Ladies in White. Every Sunday, they go to the street because they say that the house is not a jail, that the oppositors can be at home. And every Sunday they go to the street, and every Sunday they go to prison for 1, 2, or 3 days. And many of them, their children have been imprisoned their husband has been imprisoned, and they themselves have been imprisoned, being many of the ladies in white.
Yeah. So the ladies in white are the mothers of prisoners, or the wives of prisoners, is that right?
Prisoners, sorry, what is prisoners?
The ladies in white are the mothers of people who've been put in prison, or the wives of people who've been put in prison?
Yeah. Yes. In the very beginning, that was the origin, that there were a lot of husbands of them that were in jail, and then the movement began. But now the ladies in white made their activism not only because they are husbands, but because every political imprisoned in Cuba, that we have many.
Yeah. Do you think the Castro regime is getting scared? Do you think that's why repression is getting worse?
It's getting what?
Sorry. Do you think the Castro regime is scared, is afraid? Is that why they're stepping up the persecution?
Yes, of course that is afraid. They are officials, for example, they are military, the person that made the aggression to us, they hide themselves of our cameras, because the international denounce of the situation in Cuba, they don't want that, because they need the international community to try to develop the economy in the terms that the Castro regime wants. I mean, the Castro regime has the monopoly of the main activities, economical activities, and they don't want to change that. So they need some more foreign countries coming to Cuba to have important to give money, important quantity, amount of money. They need that, but they need then to hide the nature of the repression, of the aggression that they make. So they are officials, they hide themselves. For example, they usually say, well, the Cuban person, the oppositors in Cuba, they are people that receive money to do that. Yes, but they say that. But people our faces, the faces of the oppositors, are public faces. But they, the official that it's supposed that they are doing the good things, they hide themselves, they hide their identities, they hide everything around the repression that we suffer. Even, remember, we have not, technically, we have not political prisoners, because every political prisoner is in jail because the common crimes, because common crimes, not because we make activism, right? The Cuban government get us, for example, if I go to the street, they say he's making public aggression, and then they take me to the jail as if I were people that made disturbs on the streets.
Yeah. I mean, how has the repression affected you personally, and perhaps your family as well?
Oh, it's very hard. It's really hard. It's a situation that stresses a lot our common life. I have 2 children, I have a wife, and all of us have suffered some kind of intimidation. Of course, I have suffered more. I have been in jail, I have been hired from my work, I have been, the officer has come on me on the street. They follow me on the street, things like that. But for example, my son is a 10 years old boy, and he has watched me twice with police being stopped on the street to get in a police car and to be incommunicated for 24, 30 hours. It has happened a lot, and of course my children have suffered, and that is another thing that as an oppositor, I have to think always on the consequence that it has to my family, to my friends, to different kind of person. But it's my case. There are other persons, for example, that their children has suffered in the school because the professors, right? The professors has taken bad actions to their children, has abused of their children. It has happened. And the another thing that I told you before, for example, the ladies in white, their children have been imprisoned because different kind of crimes. They say, well, you don't work, so you must go to jail. You are in the black market, you must go to jail. It is important for the government, the extension of the black market in Cuba, because that is useful to them to imprison us. Because in Cuba, everyone need to buy or to sell in the black market. But that is a crime. Everyone do, but that is a crime. And when you become an oppositor, or you manifest, or you express publicly your not acceptation of the Cuban regime, then they watch if you are doing something illegal, and they can put you in prison.
Yeah. I mean, how much popular support do you think the Castro regime still has?
How much popular?
How much popular support or public support does the Castro regime still have?
Well, that is very difficult to say, of course, because probably they have some kind of survey. But without any doubt, the biggest number of Cuban people do not accept the continuity of the situation, because there is famine, there is a lack of medicines, lack of services of public health, a very bad level in education system. So our everyday life, suffer the situation that Castro regimes support to the Cubans. Yesterday, the situation of transportation, because there is a lack of oil. Remember that the oil came from Venezuela, but now there are some problems to import oil. And then the streets are full of people waiting for the transport for going to the house. And you see hundreds and hundreds of persons in the avenues waiting, and the buses don't come. That has happened yesterday, and it's happening today. And really, it's a very angry situation for population. And it just happened because the Cuban regime still keeps a way of manage the service, the public service. There are publics, but they haven't ever had the possibility, completely public, right? There are not private work, almost. Well, there is a kind of transportation, but it's short. It's not a big entrepreneurs, not a big group of entrepreneurs. It's a short service of private taxis, but the rest is completely public, and the government can support the situation, that can support a good service of this kind of transportation, public health, education. We have really hard problems in this moment.
Yeah. Now, I mean, there are some people in the West, in Britain, in America, who belong to socialist parties, who think that the Cuban government is a role model, and they would like to see that extended to Britain, to America. So, for example, I mean, the current Labour Party leader in the UK is a guy called Jeremy Corbyn, who has previously defended the Cuban regime. I mean, do you find it really, really surprising that, seeing all the hardship you're going through, but there are people living in the West who still defend the Castro regime?
Yes. I know even about Corbyn positions, and I think it made me feel angry because Castro regime has created a big group of victims. The Cuban population is a victim of a regime that is more similar to criminals than to a government, right? And it's not that here in Cuba is the struggle of classes or a fight of classes, as the Marxists say, where the poor people are good and the rich people are not good. No, that doesn't happen, of course. The poor people is worse. In this regime, poor people is worse than any other class in Cuba. Poor people has lack of services of health, public health, lack of services of education, they suffer much more the situation, the everyday situation in Cuba. So it's a myth to think that this government is a government for poor people, and without any doubt, to say it is good in the United Kingdom, it is an irresponsible position in front of the United Kingdom system, political system and economical system, but it's also an irresponsible position respect the Cuban people and the solidarity that we need as people, right? Cuba has the worst sin of the worst of an ideological system, but also the worst of a criminal organization. It is important to know that it is a criminal organization. The Cuban salary amount is $40 per month. The median per month, not per week, per month, and the smallest salary is $10, around $10. And with $10, the person need to live here with very high prices, That is what I have to say to that kind of ideology or people who talk in those terms about Cuba. For me, it's an irresponsible position.
I mean, finally, how can the West help the kind of the Cuban opposition movement, the Cuban democracy movement? How, both in terms of the American government, the British government. How can we help people like you to do your work?
Well, it is very important to give to the embassies of your governments in Cuba to give the order to say to work with the embassies, to attend, to pay attention, to receive, to help to the civil society. It doesn't matter that they don't have a relation with Cuban government, but the same door must be opened for the Cuban government and for the Cuban oppositors, right? It is vital for us. It is a problem of life or death for us. It is very important, but there is also important not to forget never the situation of human rights in our country, because as I told you before, it's not only that we have a lack of rights, it's that the government with impunity violate those rights that we have. If you read our constitution, you read a lot of new rights that we have. It's a new constitution and there are a lot of new rights, but that the government violate completely with total impunity, and not only with us, with activists, no, with the absolute number of the population. So the government from Europe and from the United States can admit that. It is important to work close the European government with the United States, because there in the United States is a community, a big community of Cubans who have worked a lot to bring the democracy to our country. And that is very important to enforce that community and to work together, which are the necessities, right, of everyone to work in favor of Cuban society, of Cuban people. And remember, it's a problem also for the international order. Now, in this moment, the democracy in the world, the democracy as system has in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, and in Cuba a very big problem, because this government take all the money of the society just to create a confusion, just to create problems in the democracy systems. You know that this government they don't care about what the society thinks, about the misery that the society suffers, but they put a lot of money to support organizations that are anti-democratic organizations, not just in South America or in Central America, but in the United States, but in Europe. And that is important to cut that, fighting against the Cuban dictatorship.
Yeah. Well, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. You're a very brave man. I'll of course send the article over to Peter when it's done, and say best of luck with everything. You've got a horrible situation, but best of luck and thanks again for your time.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure for me. Thanks for your time, thanks for everything, and please, we have already our contacts, and you can communicate with me with any necessity you have.
And same for you. Please feel free to drop me a line at any time, or any kind of other story or anything you want highlighted.
Thank you. Believe me, I will. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, then.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, then. Bye-bye.